and for hours he paced the driveway in racking thought. Then he sat on the step and looked at Belshazzar before him. "Life's growing easier every minute, Bel," said the Harvester. "Here's my Dream Girl, lovely as the most golden instant of that wonderful dream, offering me, Bel, in my present pass, the lips and the love of my little sister who never was born. And I've hurt Ruth's feelings and sent her to bed with a heartache, trying to make her see that it won't do. It won't, Bel. If I can't have genuine love, I don't want anything. I told her so as plainly as I could find words, and set her crying, and made her unhappy to end a wonderful day. But in some way she has got to learn that propinquity, tolerance, approval, affection even, is not love. I can't take the risk after all these years of waiting for the real thing. If I did, and love never came, I would end, well, I know how I would end, and that would spoil her life. I simply have got to brace up, Bel, and keep on trying. She thinks it is nonsense about thrills, and some wonderful feeling that takes possession of you. Lord, Bel, there isn't much nonsense about the thing that rages in my brain, heart, soul, and body. It strikes me as the gravest reality that ever overtook a man. She is growing wonderfully attached to me. Couldn't live without me, Bel, that is what she said. Maybe it would be a scheme to bring Granny here to stay with her, and take a few months in some city this winter on those chemical points that trouble me. There is an old saying about absence making the heart grow fonder. Maybe separation is the thing to work the trick. I've tried about everything else I know, but I'm in too much of a hurry. What a fool a man is! A few weeks ago, Bel, I said to myself that if Harmon were away and had no part in her life, I'd be the happiest man alive. Happiest man alive! Bel, take a look at me now. Happy? Well, why shouldn't I be happy? She is here. She is growing in strength and beauty every hour. She cares more for me day by day. From an outside viewpoint, it seems as if I had almost all a man could ask in reason. But when was a strong man in the grip of love ever reasonable? I think the Almighty took a pretty grave responsibility when He made men as He did. If I had been He, and understood the forces I was handling, I would have been too big a coward to do it. There is nothing for me, Bel, but to move on doing my level best. And if she doesn't awaken soon, I will try the absent treatment. As sure as you are the most faithful dog a man ever owned, Bel, I'll try the absent treatment." The Harvester arose and entered the cabin, stepping softly, for it was dark in the Girl's room and he could not hear a sound there. He turned up the lights in the living room. As he did so, the first thing he saw was the little trunk. He looked at it intently, then picked up a book. Every page he turned, he glanced again at the trunk. At last he laid down the book and sat staring, his brain working rapidly. He ended by carrying the trunk to his own room. He darkened the living room, lighted his own, drew the rain screens, and piece by piece carefully examined the contents. There were the pictures, but the name of the photographer had been removed. There was not a word that would help in identification. He emptied it to the bottom, and as he picked up the last piece, his fingers struck in a peculiar way that did not give the impression of touching a solid surface. He felt over it carefully, and when he examined with a candle, he plainly could see where the cloth lining had been cut and lifted. For a long time he knelt, staring at it, then he deliberately inserted his knife blade and raised it. The cloth had been glued to a heavy sheet of pasteboard, the exact size of the trunk bottom. Beneath it lay a half dozen yellow letters, and face down 2 tissue-wrapped photographs. The Harvester examined them first. They were of a man close 40, having a strong, aggressive face, on which pride and dominant will power were prominently indicated. The other was a reproduction of a dainty and delicate woman, with exquisitely tender and gentle features. Long the Harvester studied them. The names of the photographer and the city were missing. There was nothing except the faces. He could detect traces of the man in the poise of the girl and the carriage of her head, and suggestions of the woman in the refined sweetness of her expression. Each picture represented wealth in dress and taste in pose. Finally he laid them together on the table, picked up one of the letters and read it. Then he read all of them. Before he finished, tears were running down his cheeks, and his resolution was formed. These were the appeals of an adoring mother, crazed with fear for the safety of an only child, who unfortunately had fallen under the influence of a man the mother dreaded and feared because of her knowledge of life and men of his character. They were one long impassioned plea for the daughter not to trust a stranger, not to believe that vows of passion could be true when all else in life was false, not to trust her untried judgment of men and the world against the experience of her parents. But whether the tears that stained those sheets had fallen from the eyes of the suffering mother or the starved and deserted daughter, there was no way for the Harvester to know. One thing was clear. It was not possible for him to rest until he knew if that woman yet lived and bore such suffering. But every trace of address had been torn away, and there was nothing to indicate where or in what circumstances these letters had been written. A long time the Harvester sat in deep thought. Then he returned all the letters save one. This, with the pictures, he made into a packet that he locked in his desk. The trunk he replaced and then went to bed. Early the next morning he drove to Onabasha and posted the parcel. The address it bore was that of the largest detective agency in the country. Then he bought an interesting book, a box of fruit, and hurried back to the Girl. He found her on the veranda. Belshazzar stretched close with one eye shut and the other on his charge, whose cheeks were flushed with lovely colour as she bent over her drawing material. The Harvester went to her with a rush, and slipping his fingers under her chin, tilted back her head against him. "Got a kiss for me, honey?" he inquired. "No, sir," answered the Girl emphatically. "I gave you a perfectly lovely one yesterday, and you said it was not right. I am going to try just once more, and if you say again that it won't do, I'm going back to Chicago or to my dear Uncle Henry. I haven't decided which." Her lips were smiling, but her eyes were full of tears. "Why, thank you, Ruth. I think that is wonderful," said the Harvester. "I'll risk the next one. In the meantime, excuse me if I give you a demonstration of the real thing, just to furnish you an idea of how it should be." The Harvester delivered the sample and went striding to the marsh. The dazed Girl sat staring at her work, trying to realize what had happened, for that was the first time the Harvester had kissed her on the lips, and it was the material expression a strong man gives the woman he loves when his heart is surging at high tide. The Girl sat motionless, gazing at her study. In the marsh she knew the Harvester was reaping queen of the meadow, and around the high borders, elecampane and burdock. She could hear his voice in snatches of song or cheery whistle, notes that she divined were intended to keep her from worrying. Intermingled with them came the dog's bark of defiance as he digged for an escaping chipmunk, his note of pleading when he wanted a root cut with the mattock, his cry of discovery when he thought he had found something the Harvester would like, or his yelp of warning when he scented danger. The Girl looked down the drive to the lake and across at the hedge. Everywhere she saw glowing colour with intermittent blue sky and green leaves, all of it a complete picture, from which nothing could be spared. She turned slowly and looked toward the marsh, trying to hear the words of the song above the ripple of singing water, and to see the form of the man. Slowly she lifted her handkerchief and pressed it against her lips as she whispered in an awed voice, "My gracious Heaven! Is that the kind of kiss he is expecting me to give him? Why, I couldn't! Not to save my life!" She placed her brushes in water, set the colour box on the paper, and went to the kitchen to prepare the noon lunch. As she worked, the soft colour deepened in her cheeks, a new light glowed in her eyes, and she hummed over the tune that floated across the marsh. She was very busy when